Welcome back to another episode of Built from the Inside Out. Today I am here with an OG podcaster, Rob Garza. Welcome to the podcast and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Don't get nervous, all right?
Okay, I'll try not to.
We're friends. We're cool. I know other guests that you probably had on. You're like, man, I've never met this person. I don't know what they're like. You get a little nervous, but we're here. We're hanging out. We're cool.
Yeah.
We even have an audience. So if he laughs at something you say, that means you're doing it right.
You better laugh. No, just kidding. Well, welcome. We've been trying to do this for
Legitimately, about 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
And life hits every single time.
Mm-hmm.
But here we are.
Yes.
In a studio where I've actually done a couple of projects before.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Well, they didn't work out, but yeah, they're fine.
Well, I feel like everything you do somehow helps you later.
Totally.
Right?
And you didn't even tell me, and I like that you're doing a themed podcast, but you didn't even tell me what exactly you wanted to make this about, because I feel like unknowingly it was going to be about quite a bit of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Motivation, spiritual talk maybe, positivity.
Yeah.
So you just carry this wherever you want.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe we can start off with talking about you and podcasting, because I had my reason for starting the podcast, but whenever I wanted to upload it and actually do like the
Distribution?
computer work,
Yeah.
that I went on YouTube and I watched your videos and I was like, okay, how do I do this?
That's so random too, dude. So for a little backstory, I mean, I've been podcasting for a long time, almost 10 years actually.
Mhm.
Producing, hosting, co-hosting, the whole thing. I always enjoyed podcasting. As soon as I heard about it when I was like 21,
Mhm.
consumed as many shows as I could about, like This Week in Tech is a show that was all about tech that's still around. Adam Carolla, Joe Rogan had just started a show. And I always loved doing it. And then when the pandemic hit, my wife was working from home. I was doing some stuff still from home. And I was like, you know what? I'm sure a lot of people are trying to start a podcast. So I'd Google it, like the rates of people starting podcasts are through the roof, right? So I just tried to slap together a YouTube course or like a podcasting course on YouTube for free.
That's smart.
Yeah, except the apartment we were in at the time was small, and my wife would be like on conference calls, and I'm over here, like I wanted to be like more animated and loud and stuff, but I couldn't. So a lot of the content's like really kind of whisper, like, okay, first, and then you drag this over there. Very like lame NPR sounding. But I put it up anyway, just for a little bit, and I wanted to redo it, and I just never got around to it. And you hit me up, you're like, hey, I saw this, and I was like, holy shit. Or do you swear on here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right, just want to make sure. I didn't know if it was like, rated G.
No.
Okay.
No. You can say whatever you want.
Yeah. No, so you hit me up about it. I was like, all right, cool. And I had other friends, other people that didn't even know, because I didn't promote it or anything. I just threw it up, and whoever happened to be looking for it would find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had like 5 friends that were like acquaintances that were like, hey, man, I saw this on YouTube. Can you explain this a little more? And then you were one of them. I was like, oh, that's cool. I like that people go out there and try to be creative with their voices. Like, this is just us talking about life experiences, talking of other people that have had life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Things really cool.
Yeah, and I've actually come to really love it. Like I would sometimes when I do a podcast and then I edit it the next day, I wake up, brush my teeth, go to the computer, and then I'm still on it on Final Cut at 8 at night, and I'm like, okay, I know I need to stop or else I'm gonna get burnt out, and I don't want to get burnt out because I'm really liking this right now.
I remember my first couple podcasts too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you get so deep into the editing and make sure it's perfect, make sure it sounds good. And here where you do everything, they produce a lot of this, like this audio, like the way it's right now coming out to like listeners, you don't have to do any of that in post. Like it's already done. You basically could just upload it if you wanted to and it would sound great.
Right.
But if you really want to tweak it, then you could sit there till midnight. You're like, I'm gonna get the video at this angle, cut that down.
Yeah, and I don't even do all that. It's just that the iPhone actually is better quality. So I take the iPhone video and then I take the audio, and then sometimes it just, I don't know why, it'll glitch. And so I'll be sitting there trying to match the audio with the video, and then I can't get it to match. But I've learned that if I take the audio from this video and put it on the iPhone video, that's what works best.
Okay.
But when it comes to angles, I still need to get to that. I'm not there yet.
I thought your producer took care of all that.
He helps set up everything, but then I do all the other work.
Okay. All right. That's cool. No, yeah. So where were we? Yeah. I think it's really cool that you're doing the podcast and that you're liking it. It's only going to grow from here. Like I think at the beginning of this year, like January of 2021, there were like 1 million podcasts across the App Store or the Apple Store, right?
Mm-hmm.
In context, there's like, I think 500 million YouTube channels. So in the grand scheme of like content creation, there's like, it's still a drop in the water for as many podcasts. I think now actually, what's today, August? I think it's crossed over the 2 million. So just from January to August, there's been another 1 million people that have started shows, right?
Wow.
A lot of them will fall off. A lot of them won't go anywhere. They'll just kind of like stay dormant on the charts or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still something that people I think should do if they want to, and not feel like, oh, there's so many of them already out there.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't know what value you bring to people
Right.
because everybody specializes in something different.
Yeah.
Like you have so many different ones. Like you said, there's a tech one, maybe there's a medical one, maybe there's a entrepreneur one. There's, there's so many different things.
And you feel like you get better with everyone you do, right?
Mhm.
Like I still have my early recordings from the early, whenever I started, and you listen to them and you're like, man, I sounded dumb. Like, it feels like you talk slower, you can't form your thoughts as quickly, and you're like, "Huh, was I just walking through life sounding like a dummy?" And then you do more and more, and weeks and months and years go by, and you're like, "Man, I'm really proficient with this muscle, right? This tongue muscle of, like,
Mm,
being able to form thoughts and have conversations and actually say something of value that people wanna listen to."
all right.
So if you ever feel discouraged, it gets better, right?
Yeah, and I actually I started caring so much about this that I reached out to like a speech coach.
Nice.
He trained Miss Universe.
Really?
She won. She did good in her interview.
I don't know if that's why she won.
Okay, I'm not saying that's why she won, but
It
obviously it
helped. Oh,
helps.
yeah.
Yes. So, and he's helping out a friend who's co-hosting a show. So I'm like, he must be good. So
I
I
like
reached out
that.
to him. I just had my first class with him. So I'm really working on improving because, and one thing that I've always heard is I'm very monotone. So he's gonna help me with that. And
Dude,
we'll see what the difference is from today till I think it's like 8 weeks, 8 weeks from now.
really?
Hopefully,
Dude, that's super exciting.
yeah, I'm
'Cause
excited.
That's not I may not have told you it like that, like you're super monotone. I would have just used other like adjectives like, "Hey, try to like, sound a little bit more enthusiastic
Mhm,
about what you're talking about or whatever." Because
mhm,
people just when you're new to it, you just don't know how to like be yourself sometimes. And even if
mhm,
yourself is kind of monotone-ish,
mhm,
whatever the conversation brings like to the table should get you like excited in a particular kind of way. And
mhm.
having a coach, I think that's gonna work awesome for you.
Yeah, no, he sent me a whole list. He was like, this. We're gonna work on this. I was like, okay.
Damn. But do you feel intimidated or were you excited?
No, I'm excited because I had watching myself. I'm like, I need to work on this. I need to work on that.
That's great.
Another one is yeah. I say yeah a lot, and I had already caught that myself.
That's a good one too, like catching what you say and
Mhm.
repeat. I mean, I work with a couple people and some of them repeat a lot of things, but it's like breaking that habit where it's like you don't a lot of people do that because they don't want dead air.
Mhm.
Like if I say nothing and you say nothing, it's okay. Like you got to just let it be. And some people just try to fill every little part of dead air with, yeah, know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Marisol. But it happens. It's cool. You get over it.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's like I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
Like I don't say a lot. I'm not a
I just
person
did it
who
right
says a
there.
lot. But yeah, so I'll agree with what the person is saying, and I'm like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then I'm like, I said yeah too many times.
Nice. That's good though. You're being real conscious of what you're doing, which means you really want to perfect the craft of
Mhm.
interviewing.
Yeah. So wait, so how did you? So this was you got started back in 2010.
Uh, 12-ish. I started
Oh,
listening in 2010,
okay.
and from that 10 to 12, I was like, I don't want to just listen to this. I think I want to do this. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then, so how did you get started? What did you like? Did you go online, buy some microphones? What did you do?
Yeah. So funny enough, I had dropped out of. Let's give the whole quick story, right?
Okay.
How do you?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because people always ask, like, how do you go to be an actual like full time podcast producer? Which I'm fortunate to do, and I'm wearing one of Chingo Bling shirts right now.
Nice.
We can get into that, but
Mhm.
when I started it, it was a total just love of the craft, right? Like I love interviewing, I love talking, I love getting good insight from people. So I wanted to start a show about talking to people it was called the Pursuit Podcast, and just talking to people that were pursuing their passions in life, kind of like what you're doing, honestly,
Okay.
and getting their like hacks and tips and tricks about how they got from dreaming about this thing to executing on being a film director, being a professional fighter, being whatever. I interviewed hundreds of people over that course of like 7 or 8 years. And when I first started, I had just dropped out of college. I had just started a full-time job at an office in a cubicle that was miserable, right?
Mhm.
But I managed to like scrounge up money to buy a microphone that at the time connected to your phone. I think they still make them. They're called like iRigs.
Mhm.
It was just one of these with the old, whatever the charging cable was.
Okay. Yeah.
And I would just pass it back and forth to the people that would actually give me their time of day to do a podcast, right? They're like, this guy's coming to me with his iPhone and a microphone and he wants to have a conversation. So sure. So I did probably like 12 or 15 of them with just one phone and an iPhone, microphone.
Mhm.
And I would record it on a field recording app on my phone. And then I would export it on my computer and edit it through Audacity, which I still use because it's free and it's easy to use.
Okay.
And from that, I got like an actual external Zoom recorder. And then from that, I got a better Zoom recorder and a computer. And then it just kind of built upon that. But it was super, super simple at first.
And then, so how did you choose your guests? Like for your first episode, were you like, I've been wanting to talk to this person, or were you just call a friend and?
Yeah. So back then in 2011, 12, Twitter was really the wild, wild west, and it was also popping, but not in a toxic way like it is today.
Okay.
So when I first started doing it, I was also just getting in heavily into Joe Rogan's show and Adam Carolla and Bill Burr. And you would go on Twitter and you could actually use those hashtags like hashtag Houston or hashtag whatever and find people that were just talking about cool things. It's like everybody in that one like point in time, we're
Mhm.
all discovering podcasts, we're all discovering these new ideas. And we would actually, we would meet on Twitter by using the hashtag. This is so lame, kind of like I'm looking back on it, but Rogan always had this death squad. Like that's what he called like his group of comics, like his group of
Okay.
friends. They
Mhm.
were called the Death Squad, right? And they actually had a Death Squad podcast where they'd all kind of just, periodically come on the show and they would tour and they would come to Houston to the Improv or they'd come to some other smaller venues. And on Twitter, we would like hashtag, who's going to the hashtag Death Squad Houston show. So I met a ton of these Joe Rogan fans that were on Twitter from the area and we would get together and I had some of them on the podcast. And through that little circle,
Mhm.
I got to interview probably like a dozen people that had been on Joe Rogan's show in the early days of the show.
Oh, wow.
And some of them are still really good friends now. And we've gotten to do a bunch of cool things over the years. And it all just started from Twitter. And now I don't even use my Twitter. I remember the last time I sent out a tweet.
I never used I have it, but I never got it.
Yeah.
So I've never really
It,
used it.
it it's just such a toxic place. Like you always
Mhm.
hear it referenced of like how people are trying to cancel people and
Oh, yeah.
all the toxicity of the trolls. And
Mhm.
it's just a place where people literally go to diarrhea of the mouth, things that don't matter.
Okay.
So I don't use it anymore. But back then, that's how I got on my guest. And on
Okay.
Instagram, I could just message you, whether I follow you or don't follow you.
Mhm.
Sure, it might go to your request folder. You might not even see it if you get a lot of messages. But on Twitter, you had to follow them and they had to follow you. And that's still how it is. So somehow I would follow the person I wanted to talk to,
Mhm.
hopefully find an email that they had, like, on their websites or something. And if they didn't, I would have to interact enough to where they would see one of my tweets saying like, hey, follow me back. I'd like to DM you about, XYZ, doing a podcast or something. And
Okay.
somehow that worked, dude. Because nowadays, imagine texting or rather tweeting anybody or DMing anybody like, hey, like follow me so I can interact with you,
Yeah, that
stranger that you don't
yeah.
know. Like they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
things
how
have
that's
changed.
super crazy.
Mhm.
But
Uh,
that's kind of how the rundown of the beginning of it.
who was like the who has been your favorite guest that you had at the beginning?
That's a tough question. I had a ton of crazy cool guests, but
Mhm.
one of which is this film director, producer from Canada. His name's Adam Scorgie. He produced two of the top pot docs in the world. So I don't know if any of you here smokes weed, but he made the two biggest like pot documentaries in the world.
Okay.
The Union was the first one that was released in like the mid 2000s, like 2007 or 6 or something like that, or
Mhm.
maybe even 2005. And then the follow up to that was called The Culture High. And Joe Rogan was in both of those films. A bunch of celebrities and high profile people were in those films. When he did Rogan for the first time, again, like in early 2000, I don't know, 10, 11,
Mhm.
I reached out to him and I followed him and he followed me back. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. We would interact on Twitter. And then I shot him a message like, hey, man, big fan, love what you do. Do you mind doing my podcast? And from that kind of started, like once I released his episode
Mhm.
on Twitter and more people shared it and people saw that who I had on and I, put it in my bio, like recent guests, like XYZ, more people were more inclined to do it. And this is human nature, right? If
Mhm.
you know somebody or you want to like get to know them and you know somebody else by proxy or you know that someone that they talked to had like a higher profile, it's
Mhm.
just human nature. You're like, man, can I rub enough elbows with this person and like get connected with someone else and so on and so forth?
Right.
And him doing my show and becoming a friend and retweeting me, often or shouting me out or whatever kind of helped like that snowball in the early days. And we still talk. Ironically enough, he also has family here in Houston. So he
Okay.
would visit once a year and
Mhm.
we would always he would always make time for me. He still does. When he
That's
comes down,
awesome.
we'll go out to have a drink or have dinner. And one of the events or one of the times he came, he was doing like a campaign or yeah, like an event campaign for the second documentary that he made about
Mhm.
pot. And you could almost like you could volunteer yourself to host an event and you had to sell out the theater in order for the event to take place. So I was like, hey man, like I would love to get a bunch of eyes on this film here in Houston. The podcast had a lot of listeners at the time. So I did, and they had it at Studio Movie Grill in City Center.
Okay.
So we
Yeah.
we sold out one of the big theaters there. It was like 175 people, I think.
Oh, wow.
And it was just through Twitter. Because at the time, Instagram wasn't even a big thing for me. It was
Mhm.
Twitter, the podcast, him, and then all over the country, people were volunteering to sign up to host these events. And he would fly to the city. We'd all watch the film, and then we'd do a Q&A after that. And then we got to hang out. And it was just like this little meetup before like
Mhm.
meetups were a big thing, before these influencers were doing these huge meetups,
Right.
before DLB was running around having tens of thousands of people, do these events.
Yeah,
That was like my first taste of what you could do outside of the podcast because of a conversation you had with someone.
that is so cool.
Yeah.
So then you said after you did that with him, more people started.
Yeah.
So like, what are some big names?
So there's an old school punk rock band called Mxpx. They came
Okay.
out when Blink-182 came out, when Green Day like stormed, the scene.
Okay.
Had it not been for probably a band like Green Day, it would be MXPX. That would be like the band of that time for like punk
Okay.
rock. But the lead singer, same thing happened on Twitter. It interacted, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. He did the show. He actually came and froze to it, Lone Star Cryo, when he was in
Mhm.
town. He did a show. He came over to my house and we smoked and did a podcast. It was just like, holy shit, this is crazy.
That's
Um,
so cool.
the Painter, there's a show that was filmed in Dallas called Fast and Loud,
Mhm.
Gas Monkey Garage. So Casey Matthews, same thing. That ended up being that his wife ran, I mean, they have a huge account on Twitter and Instagram. I think it's like, I don't know, 500,000 people or something like that now. But at the time, it was still big for the time.
Mhm.
And it turned out that she ran the Twitter account and she somehow, this is so weird. I don't even know if I believe her, honestly, now thinking back on it, but she somehow listened to the podcast. So when I reached out to him, she was like, yeah, I actually listen to your podcast. I'm Casey's wife and her name's also Casey.
Oh,
And I was
okay.
like, what? She's like, yeah, I heard someone on there or something like that, or like a while
Mhm.
back. So yeah, I'll tell my husband to reach out to you. Gave me his number, gave me his phone number. So then I
Uh,
texted him. I was like, oh shit, I'm texting Casey Matthew. And he had just left the show, Fast and Loud. I believe he had already left it. And he did his own thing, opened up his own speed shop, his own paint shop, and wasn't doing the Discovery show anymore. And I went up to Dallas and did an episode. And then I had him on a second time. They invited me into their home. They barbecued, hung out with the kids and family. And I was like, dude, this is crazy. And it just kind of like one after another, I would have cool experiences like that.
Mhm. So okay, so you were doing the podcast, and then you also had Lone Star Cryo.
So
So for those
yes.
those watching or listening
Yeah.
and don't know how Rob and I met, we met through Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
He DM'd me.
Mm-hmm.
Had you met Natalia, or how
No,
did you guys connect?
I honestly don't remember. I think it was one of those friends of a friend. I don't know
Okay.
if, because she had competed or was friends with Mighty Soul, right? But I didn't even know that because I didn't meet Mighty Soul until way later
Oh, I
in
didn't
the
know they knew
story.
each other.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know they know each other now, but
Yeah.
okay.
So they competed, right? And then I have another friend who owns a gym that I work out at in Sugarland. I think she had also competed with Mighty Soul and Natalia. And somehow I just saw it on Instagram, this whole
Okay.
circle of friends that I didn't necessarily know really well at the time, but I knew of. And
Mhm.
one of them also came and froze and whatever. And then I saw you, and then I got wind of the Miss Houston Latina, which I didn't even know was a thing. And then I was like, oh, cool. So I was looking for people to just come experience this new thing because so to kind of catch people up, I had opened Lone Star Cryotherapy with two old friends and business partners, and it was a cryotherapy facility. Basically, like if people don't know, it's like the thing where you hop in and you freeze your body, for 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, and it's
Mhm.
good for recovery and inflammation and so on and so forth. And you were just one of the people that I don't know what it was, just because maybe I was like, oh, it's kind of by association. Like if I tell you I know XYZ also, like you might want to come try this.
Mhm.
And you did, and you came, and we just kind of, started a friendship that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember going in there and being in the what's it called, a chamber?
Yeah, the cryo chamber.
Sorry, chamber before I went to accept alone and like telling you my life problems. Not life problems, but like I'm like, I have to make this big decision and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, dude. And that's how, honestly, a part of that job was being like a therapist to people. My wife sent me a screenshot of a shirt. You see like ads on Instagram all the time.
Mhm.
I saved it. I forgot what it is, but it's something to the effect of like, I'm going to bill you after this conversation. And that's exactly what it was like, man. Like everybody that I talked to, even though it's 2 to 3 minutes,
Uh-huh.
the amount of things that people will tell you in 2 to 3 minutes when they're freezing their asses off is unbelievable. And also because it's pretty intense, right?
Yes.
If you're not used to it, and even when you are used to it, it's still,
Mhm.
it's really cold. You're like, oh my God, my body's in the shock. So you're just like talking a million miles a minute. And you're
Mhm.
sometimes when they get out there like, hey, I don't know why I told you that. Can you keep that between us? I'm like, yeah, don't worry. It's fine. It's almost like I was a legit therapist. And I
Yeah.
liked listening and talking and being somebody's ear from time to time.
Mhm.
So yeah, you came in with your own things, and it was all just, it was common. Like we all have our own things, the career choices, the paths that we take creatively, the decisions that we think about. Just to have somebody, because we weren't like besties or anything, but when you have somebody who's looking at it from the inside, from the outside in, maybe they have a perspective that could help you out. Not to say that you're going to listen to somebody you barely know or an acquaintance, but it might help, right?
Right. And I don't know if it's because you're trying not to think that you're freezing.
Yeah.
So you're over there, like, so how's that life? What have you been up to? And you're just like trying to say like anything to get your mind off of the fact that your
Yep.
body's freezing.
Yep. And
So
sometimes
maybe that's it.
yeah, you might say a little
Yeah.
too much, or you're like, "Hey, wait, I didn't say that," whatever. But it was always fun. Like no one really
Mhm.
said anything too crazy. It was just more like trying to make conversation.
Yeah. So how did you start that?
Yeah. So I was podcasting, right?
Mhm.
And before the whole podcasting thing, my thing was always I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to own my own business and wanted to work for myself. And in my 20s, I'm 31 now. I'll be 32 in October. I think I had probably a total of like 3 actual corporate jobs. They didn't count from like 16 to like 18, a bunch of retail stuff,
Okay.
I was a manager at a GameStop, that kind of thing. That I don't really think that counts. And then you get out of college or you get out of high school, you try college. Did you graduate from college?
I did.
Okay, good
Mhm.
for you. Did you graduate from college? About to. Congratulations. I don't poo-poo it, right? It just wasn't for me. So I went up to
Yeah.
Sam Houston State. I gave it a shot for a year. I went to community college and did that first and then went to Sam Houston State. It just wasn't for me, right? So I got out and I wanted to start a business, but I didn't know what. But I found a way to become an independent contractor to do different types of like logistic jobs in the meantime. I was also podcasting, right? I was like, what am I going to do? And it was Joe Rogan talking about cryotherapy
Really?
that put it on this kind of map for me. And I
Okay.
started looking into it, and my business partners also listened to Rogan, and we're like, hey, this doesn't exist in Houston really at all. There was like 1 or 2 places where you could do it,
Mhm.
but it was like a part of a physical therapist office, or it was part of like something else. It wasn't really like a standalone thing.
Okay.
So long story short, we got all of our ducks in a row. We did our research. We went up to a seminar about that kind of business
Mhm.
model and the equipment, and we put it all together in like 6 months. And then we opened our
Oh,
first
wow.
location in Sugarland. And then a year from then, the original office was honestly like this where we are now. This studio and a half was the original office, and we shared it similarly to the people that were doing it before us
Mhm.
with a chiropractor. So it
Okay.
went in conjunction with a chiropractor friend that we had. And there was another physical therapist like in League City that I
Mhm.
kind of took a lot of advice from. And he was a friend of a friend.
Mhm.
And we just outgrew the space. It was probably like 700 square feet. We outgrew that in 12 months and then expanded
Okay.
to a bigger commercial storefront. And from there, things kind of took a turn for the worse with like bad contractors and people that just kind of screwed us over.
Mm.
Hurricane Harvey happened at the same time.
Oh,
And it
okay.
was just like it was a mess. So
Okay.
that's kind of how that started. But in
Mhm.
the meantime, whenever it's good, I met
Mhm.
you and I met a bunch of other cool people and
Yeah.
I kept a lot of those relationships still.
That's awesome. So then that closed down, and then what happened?
So then in the middle or like towards the end of that, journey or whatever,
Mhm.
I was still podcasting and I still wanted to do that. And I've always had this knack for doing, I guess, like social media managing for other businesses, like they were similar to mine or that were
Okay.
just, small businesses that didn't know how to market their business or didn't know how to run Facebook and Instagram ads, didn't have time for it or whatever.
Mhm.
So I was still doing that on the side as well. I was running my business. I was working there 7 days a week. I was there 10 hours a day. And even afterwards, you're always working on your thing, right? As you know, with the supplement
Mhm.
company or with anything
Yeah.
you have going on, you're always working on it.
Yep.
So even outside of that, I would still take on these clients on like retainers and help them strategize the way that they were marketing their companies or that they were marketing their products. And or I would structure the Facebook ads for them and I'd run them and we'd manage them, all this kind of stuff. Because I was single. I was just having a good time. And if I wasn't having a good time, I was working. So I was like, let me do this instead because it's less, it's better for me.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I was doing that. And then somehow Chingo was one of the first entertainers who I interacted with on Instagram the way that it did these people on Twitter years before.
Okay.
And it just got to the point where he would reply almost like, and I see this now that I've been working with him for a few years, but you'll see regular like people or avatars or names and like
Mhm.
you'll interact with these people. You'll see that celebrities sometimes interact with the same names if you follow them close enough.
Okay.
And I was kind of one of those people, I guess. And if I get some of this wrong and he happens to listen to this, this is how I recall it. It could be different. It was a while ago.
Mhm.
But I sent him a message because I wanted him to come freeze as
Okay.
Canelo because he has like 3 or 4 really famous
Oh,
Canelo sketches.
yes.
And I
I
wanted
love
him to,
those.
yeah, man.
Those
Those,
push-ups, those
yes,
sit-ups.
yes, con los cornflakes,
Yes.
they're some of my favorite sketches. And at the time, I think Canelo had a fight with Triple G or somebody coming up.
Mhm.
And I think it was before Harvey or maybe it might have been after Harvey, but we were going to have it to where he was going to come and freeze maybe. And I didn't even pitch that part yet, but I wanted him to also bring the wig and do it as Canelo because
Okay.
Canelo really had done cryotherapy not too long before that. So I was like, oh,
Okay.
it'd be perfect, right? And then actually, yeah, Harvey had hit. The whole Houston was shut down for like a month.
Uh,
The business had to be, had to replace some flooring or roofing or something. And next thing you know, 2 or 3 months had passed by, and then we just kind of hadn't interacted anymore. So then, fast forward a couple more months, I just happened to reach out to him about what was it? I think it was podcasting. I was just like, "Hey man, have you ever thought about starting a podcast?" Because he would do like, and he still does Instagram lives, or rather Facebook lives, pretty regularly on his page.
okay.
And I would tune in when I could, and there were always really good conversations. He would be on the road with other comedians at like venues, and they'd be backstage in the green room, and they'd be talking about, whatever, life or the sets or the tour. And I messaged him after watching a few of those. I'm like, hey man, not thinking he was gonna see it, because the amount of DMs this man gets, and most public figures, and I'm sure even you get, and I did when I had the business, you just can't get to them all, right?
Right.
So I sent him a DM one afternoon night. I was going to Home Depot to get something for the store for my office or something, and I shot him the DM, and I drove probably 2 miles to the Home Depot for my office, and I parked, and I looked at my phone, and he replied back, and he was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Give me a call, or here's my number," or something like that. And I was like, "Oh shit!" I had already turned the car off, right?
Mhm.
So I went ahead and I was like, "Cool, man, sounds good. Here's my number. Call me whenever you want to chat." Before I could open the door, he called me. I was like,
Uh,
"Oh, dope. Chingo Bling's calling me." So I answered the phone. I had already turned the car off,
Mhm.
and I didn't want the Bluetooth to mess up the connection of the call.
They just
So
sat
I just
there.
sat there in the hot car, and I didn't turn it back on. And we ended up talking for 20 minutes.
Oh.
I was drenched by the time we finished the conversation. And I was like, that was totally worth it. And I told my wife about it later, and she was like, why didn't you turn the, or even go in the store or outside in the shade or something? I was like, I just didn't want to fuck up the call. I was like, if this ends, like, who knows if he ever calls me back or whatever. And she was like, okay, well, weirdo, whatever. So yeah, man, that's how it all started. It was just a random struck of luck that he read it and replied and wanted to do something. So it also started with doing social media managing of sorts for him, doing ads for the tour at the time, which was in 2019 or 18.
Mhm.
And yeah, running ads, recording stuff, editing videos for him, and then simultaneously the podcast as well, starting the podcast and getting all that going. And we've kind of been working together ever since. Almost got to do nothing last year, literally, because there was no touring, there was nothing.
Oh,
So we
that's
kind of almost didn't work together at all in 2020, or
mhm.
we didn't work together all in 2020, and then got back together towards the end of it after the election.
Okay.
And that's kind of how where we are now.
Okay. Yeah, because I remember I had. How did I get back in contact with you? I don't even remember.
I don't
What
remember
was it?
either,
Do you
honestly.
remember? No?
No. Um, I think you may have asked me to do the podcast, honestly.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think it was the end of at the end of last year ish, because we were supposed to do this around Christmas time, I think, or before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And you had told me, hey, I'm starting a podcast. And I think maybe you had, it was the YouTube thing too, the YouTube course. You were watching it and you were
Yeah.
just asking, questions about podcasting. I was like, yeah, whenever you need something, just hit me up about, where to upload and how to distribute and all that. And then we started trying to make it happen. It seemed like every
Mhm.
month something came up. You were going out of town or somebody was going somewhere. I had something to do, and it just took forever.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it finally happened.
What?
I said I'm glad it
Oh,
finally
yeah, me too.
happened.
No, this is super
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I remember we had talked about talking about how to monetize.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that?
Monetizing a podcast or monetizing what?
I guess we can start with a podcast and then kind of maybe like a little bit general to whereas like how can you monetize what you like to do maybe?
Okay, that's a
Yeah.
really hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to talk about too, because there's so many different ways. Like if we're talking about a podcast, funny enough, when I was doing my show, unless you have like a ton of downloads, right, it's really hard to get an advertiser to want to give you any kind of money.
Mhm.
So there are like industry standards for podcasting, which I haven't looked at them in a while, but I would have to say I think it's still like the CPM, the cost per mile being like the cost per 1,000 downloads is X, right? I think it's, let's say $25. So
Okay.
for every 1,000 downloads that you have, you potentially could generate $25 for like a mid-roll ad. So for advertisements on a show, I don't know if you don't run actually, you don't run any ads on your show except for
I
your own stuff.
yeah, just my own stuff.
Yeah. So if you had something at the beginning, a mid-roll and then an end roll or whatever, yeah, an ending ad, it would be different rates. But usually in the middle, let's just say it's like $25, and you would just tally up like, oh, I have 10,000, monthly listeners or 15,000 monthly listeners. You could probably make your own little chart of what you could potentially charge a company. Like pick one that you like. I don't want to use supplements because you have your own line, but a popular one is like, what's the greens company? Whatever the greens company is, right?
Okay.
You would just reach out to them because all these companies have podcasting advertising divisions now as a part of their marketing. And you just
Oh.
send them an email and be like, hey, And now too, you could just use your social media following along with your podcast downloads, along with your credits. Like when Marisol, Chingo's manager, also put something together, like I forgot what she calls it. It's like it's his bio, right? His pitch, like a pitch deck of sorts. It's who
Okay.
he is, what he's done, what he does, how many eyeballs or ears you have on these things, and
Okay.
then you just start negotiating these potential offers. Like if you know you have 10,000 listeners a month,
Mhm.
and you know that it's $25 per thousand, you could probably gauge how much you want to try to charge per episode, right?
Okay.
Or even per weekly or per monthly, depending on what it is you're trying to do. And that's one way of doing it. When I was doing it, I probably at the peak of the show probably had like 7 to 10,000 strangers that were listening to me talk on a weekly basis for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And this I don't think existed. I did never looked at advertising early on in like 2010, 11, 12.
Mhm.
So I was just reaching out to companies and just trying to get product.
Okay.
I would just reach out and I got like P28, the company, the protein bread and the protein peanut butter and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
They sent me product. Coco Vita sent me drinks, and all these companies would just send products to advertise them. And that's just basically what I was doing on the early days. And then you start learning about, oh, I can actually get money from people for advertising their products. So
Mhm.
those are two ways. Like now, maybe just build a relationship. Like even FitAid. FitAid makes really good drinks that I like, and we reached out to them. And FitAid sent us a care package, and On It and Black Rifle and all these companies have sent out care packages,
Oh, okay.
and that's one way to build a relationship, right? And maybe something that might be something you might want, like just that,
Mhm.
because some people that I've met do a podcast along with like a YouTube show of sorts where they like review products or they
Mhm.
have whatever breakdowns of unboxings and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And it kind of works out for them. Like they get products for the podcast, they advertise the brand,
Mhm.
and then they also take the product and they'll do YouTube videos about it, and then they'll monetize it through YouTube. So
Okay.
there's like a bunch of other ways that you can go around just getting like a dollar amount for a company.
Okay. So for someone who's like just thinking about starting a podcast, because I have friends who want to start one, but
hmm
they don't know how, they're not sure. What advice do you have for them?
Uh, get ready to really dedicate some time to it, as you know, right?
Yes.
So when I walked in here, I said, "Oh, this room looks way different." And you're like, "From when?" I was like, "Well, I actually did a couple of projects here, and by projects I mean a couple of episodes of a podcast of somebody who at the time was just an acquaintance. He had actually, I think, same thing, reached out to me on Instagram and was a Chingo Bling fan or something like that. And he's like, "Hey, I have a podcast too. Do you mind doing it?" And I was like, "No, not at all." I don't always say yes, by the way, because I do get that a lot.
Right.
Which I'm grateful for. I get people that want to like have drinks or have dinner and stuff, and they're fans of Chingo. And sometimes, most of the time, I'm assuming it's just because they want to like get the connect somehow. Which I
Okay.
don't mind putting that together sometimes if it makes
Mhm.
sense. But if I can't just say yes to everybody, right?
Right.
So anyway, I did the podcast. It was really fun. It was a great conversation, and it was literally a year later. I did this guy's episode.
Mhm.
He's an acquaintance still. We follow each other on social media, but we haven't talked in like eight or 10 months. And a year later, he's like, "Hey man, I have this idea for a show that's just like a silly, podcast where we just talk about pop culture and current events or whatever. You want to maybe try to be my co-host?" And it just so happened, and we had kept in touch a little bit through social media. And
Mhm.
I was like, "Yeah, why not? Let's give it a try, see what happens." Right. So he was like, "All right, I have a space here," because he did another show here. Let's give it a whirl. So we did, and it was fun. And then the election started taking place. And then we had started having conversations a little bit about left, right, this and that.
Okay.
And literally, dude, we did an episode the day after the election or the day of the election or something like that.
Mhm.
And the exchange got a little heated on his part because he was the kind of person that didn't know how to have a conversation. It turned into a debate. And I never try to debate you on anything. Like, you believe what you believe, and that's cool.
Mhm.
Let's just have a dialogue, right? An open dialogue.
Right.
So the next day or the next week when we were supposed to record a couple days before, he was like, "Hey, my daughter," I believe this is how it went. "My daughter has the vid. Gonna have to quarantine, XYZ." And I was like, "Dude, well, I hope she gets well better or hope she gets better soon. Hit me up. Let me know whenever you want to start rescheduling and get back on track." They were going to, be quarantined for like 2 weeks or whatever. And never heard from him again.
Oh, wow.
Just never heard from him again.
So talking about politics, so that's what Chingos is kind of
That's what it turned
mainly,
into.
right? That's what it
Yeah.
turned. So whenever you reached out to him, were you like, did you have that in mind that that's what you guys were going to talk about?
No, the first 2 years or the first year and a half, he had already had a show that he was trying to do called the What Did He Said podcast, which is kind of like a reference to his first album and a song on that first album. And old school Chingo Bling fans know that reference, What Did He Said, right?
Okay.
So we were doing just kind of like this, an interview show. We'd have, his wife would be on sometimes. we'd have comedians that were, so if somebody was doing a show at the Improv or was doing a show at the Joke Joint or at the Secret Group, whatever, we would try to get them in.
Mm.
Very similar to Joe Rogan, very similar to a lot of other podcasters who are in the comedy space. Like if you look at the top charts,
Mhm.
it's like comedy is always like number one or two, and then it's like news, and that's it,
Okay.
right? And the other three kind of like society, philosophy, information, they all kind of fall in the top five, but it's always comedies like one or two. And comedians, I don't know what you listen to in particular, but they do a pretty good job about interviewing other people and other comedians, and we were doing the same thing.
Mhm.
And it didn't quite hit. It just didn't hit in a way that we wanted it to as far as like feedback. I don't know what it was. And I kind of attributed to the fact that not a lot of Hispanics or Mexicans were listening to podcasts at a rate that like white people were or other demographics, right? I think Asians were up the top of the charts or something. So I was just like, it's just not really hitting with his audience. And then we did it for a year and some change. And then the lockdowns happened. We did no touring, which in turn meant like, let's put a halt on all projects. Like there's no budget to do other things because it's just, we're kind of at a standstill, right? And they started focusing on other things. Meanwhile, they were locked down at home. I understand everyone wanted to be isolated. Nobody wanted to hang out with people. It was a crazy time.
Mhm.
And then we kept in touch periodically through text and things. And we had been working together for probably 2 years prior to that. So we were still cool and all, but I understood like, all right, we're going to put this project on the shelf for now.
Mhm.
And then leading up to the election, he just started going on Twitter talking about stuff that he was noticing, right?
Okay.
And if people don't know who Chingo Bling is, he is literally his middle name might as well be Mr. They Can't Deport Us All. A
Yeah.
lot of immigration talk in his songs. A lot of his Netflix special is called "They Can't Deport Us All," right? It's one of those things that when he started talking about anything that had to do remotely with a conservative value, for whatever reason, even though most Latinos are pretty conservative,
That's what I don't understand.
I don't get it. I know we talk about it 2-3 times a week and we still don't get it for it's been 7-8 months now.
Yeah.
But he started talking about stuff on Twitter and just kind of like the way he put it, he was like, I was putting like breadcrumbs out there, on Twitter, just tweeting this and that, maybe a story or an article or a video.
Mhm.
And then one night, I don't know what, honestly, we didn't, the very first episode of Red Pill Tamales, which is what Wendy said turned into,
Mhm.
he went into the studio and put on a mariachi hat and then put on whatever the Twitter Live was. I don't even think they have it anymore, but it's an app within
I don't know.
Periscope. He went live on
Oh,
Periscope,
okay.
which I think they don't even use anymore. But he did a live on Periscope and just for like 45 minutes was talking about all kinds of stuff, like what was going on and at the border and politics and Trump and Biden and who you voting for and this and that, right?
Mhm.
And then he told a story about how he was driving down somewhere on Westheimer, Alabama or something, and there was a car next to him that had like, I don't know, a Biden sticker or something like that or flag, and they made some kind of reference, and he just kind of looked at the car and he was telling a joke on the live, right? Like, I don't know, Trump's not so bad or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it turned into this crazy thing where people who were fans at the time, I guess, and aren't anymore, they cut up a lot of that long 45-minute live and just
Mhm.
made videos out of context about how Chingo Bling denounces his brown skin and Chingo Bling denounces,
Oh my
the Mexican
goodness.
culture and, he says Latinos, blah, blah, blah. And it just turned into this like storm of just like pretty intense, trolling, and people were sending him, I think he might have even gotten a few death threats or something, and
No
people were
way.
trying to dox him, and it was crazy. So I was just kind of watching all this unfold, right? And I'm just like, man, that's crazy. And I put my phone down. I told my wife, like, oh man, that's
As a
nuts.
producer, you're like, oh.
Yeah, I was like, man, he's really gotten himself into some mess here, right? And I put it down. And then one night, probably like, I don't know, a couple of days after the election, because it took like a week or something to get the final results for this election, which we don't have to get into. We can maybe save that for a whole nother episode. But I texted him. I was like, hey man, I see what you're doing on Twitter. You're really causing a ruckus or a storm with your fans. You thought about maybe like talking about it long form, like taking it back podcast style? And again, kind of like the very first time we interacted, he called me and I was like, what's up? And we talked for like 45 minutes on the phone about a bunch of stuff. And the next weekend, I went back to the studio and we started doing Red Pill Tamales. And I think by that time, finally, like 10 days or 8 days later, they declared Biden the winner, right?
Mhm.
So then we just started talking about everything from the beginning of last summer and the campaign trail to the election night. And then it turned into just talking about what's going on now at the border. We've had, border patrol chiefs and people in different cities that are going through a bunch of different things with small businesses and schools and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of turned into this political show. And the fans have really done like a complete, I don't know if they've done a 180. Maybe some of them have admitted that like riding with Biden might have not been the best thing.
Yeah.
And others have just completely gone away and unfollowed or whatever, and the ones that are now interacting are those that see what we see and
Okay.
are on board with what we're talking about. So there's no more death threats. There's no more like
Right.
doxing. Like
Yeah.
it's like the Latinos that supported that
Mhm.
are now not as scared anymore. Like the way he puts it is that he took all the arrows already. Like it's
Mhm.
okay because I got all the shit for it. You're not gonna hear George Lopez talk about it. You're not gonna hear about John Leguizamo talking about it.
Mhm.
Eva Longoria.
Yeah.
I'm talking about it. And if you want to ride this way, talk about it. We have discussions and people on to talk about it.
How did he feel at first? Like, and how did you feel as his producer?
I mean, I grew up in the country. Like I'm a country boy. Like I grew up
Okay.
raising cattle. I grew up in that lifestyle. My dad
Mhm.
was in the military. I was always pretty like I say it to this day, like socially liberal and financially, conservative, I guess, or fiscally conservative in the sense where like, I just like people to leave me alone. Let me do what I want to do. I don't care what you do. Like if you're trans, you're gay, you're this, you're that, you don't believe in God, you do believe in God. I mean, that's all cool. Like, can you be a good person? You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
it never in a time in history, and I'm only 31. Do I remember a time where people were at each other's throat based off who they voted for? Like we had this conversation on Friday about somebody had asked, can you look back in your lifetime and like who would be the best president, right?
Mhm.
And I went back. I was born in 89. When were you born?
90.
90? Same
Mhm.
time, right? Reagan was just coming out. And then you had like Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, Biden. I'm like, well, if I had to pick out of that, who am I going to pick?
Yeah.
I'd have to go with Trump, whatever. I thought he was entertaining at the very least. I
Yeah.
thought the mean tweets were funny,
Yeah.
you know?
Same.
So we just, it was hard for the fans at first. And
Mhm.
for me, I was on board.
Mhm.
But it's gotten to the point where sometimes we'll go so deep into some rabbit holes that I'll have to admit on the show, I mean, like, fans of Chingo Bling, I feel responsible for what's going on now because he is so deep on some. And I mean, I agree with most of the things. Like, they
Mhm.
are just strange anomalies that you can't explain. But
Mhm.
some people will say, no, that's completely false. That never happened. Like, well, if you say so. But I was on board with it.
Yeah. Well, so I didn't know much about politics. Did not care, whatever.
That's how most people are, though. When
Yeah.
you're busy and you're living your life,
Yeah.
it's what it
At
is.
home, nobody ever talked about it. And at work, my friends, people are like, oh no, it's like religion. Don't talk about it because people don't agree. So I knew nothing about it. I didn't even know there was a blue and a red side. I had no idea. So whenever the George Floyd thing happened,
Hmm.
that's when I started
That's what got you into
wondering.
it?
Yeah, I was like, hold on. I was like, what's going on? Because it was COVID, right? So I
Hmm.
was at home. I had time to do research. So I'm like, what? I'm like, I know this isn't the first black guy that gets killed, but
Right.
they're making such a big deal about it.
Yeah.
Like it was just different. So I wanted to know why. Why is it such a big deal? I mean, obviously it's wrong.
Sure.
I'm not saying it's not. It is for sure. But I was like, why is he getting more attention
Hmm.
than other people? So I started researching, came across Candace Owens,
Okay.
and then other people who think like her, and I was like, okay, this is what I was thinking,
Uh
and she's
huh.
confirming. So I'm like, let me start doing more research.
How interesting, right? That
Hmm.
so are any of your parents from Mexico?
Yes,
Both
both.
or both of them
Yeah.
are?
Well, my dad, I don't know, so but my mom, yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
So my mom's from Durango.
Okay.
I'd go to Mexico all the time.
Hmm.
Not that I love that part of my culture, right? Of
Hmm.
my past or whatever, of my heritage. But like you just said, you described literally what I think some people go through is you didn't really care about it. You didn't know much about it. It really didn't, you didn't feel like it had to do anything with your life, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And then something happens and you start looking things up and you just happen to, because I think if you would have found like Kyle Kalinske or you would have found David Packman first before finding a Candace Owens or let's just say Ben Shapiro, Steven
Mhm.
Crowder or something, you probably wouldn't have fallen so quickly into what they were saying. You probably would have like questioned what they said. Whereas
Mhm.
you happen to find Candace in this side and you're like, well, that makes sense right off the bat, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people just, I don't know, they ignore that or they don't want to agree with it or they just find reasons not to agree with it,
Mhm.
especially Latinos in general. Let me just say that. Like Latinos in general, I think if,
That's what surprised me the
yeah,
most
it,
because once I found out like there's a conservative and a liberal and what conservatives stand for and what liberals stand for, and I'm like traditional Mexicans are conservative. They're
right,
race conservative.
right.
I'm like, why?
Yeah.
I'm like, hold on, I don't get it.
Yeah. And a lot of it will always go back to like, the border policies or Reagan this or the early 90s that. But when we're just talking about values as a community, right?
Mhm.
As a household, right? As a
Right.
tribe of people, they tend to lean this way
Mhm.
100% of the time.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the votership or the swing of a vote,
Mhm.
the liberals and the left and all that always want to try to get their hands in that and say that no, they vote blue. What's whatever. I mean, it's a strange thing, but That's how, I mean, 99% of his fans are Latinos, right? Or Latinx, as they say these days. Whatever the fuck that means. I don't even know what that means, you know?
I don't know.
So they took offense to it, but luckily it's coming back around where they're not sending death threats anymore, which is good.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it's also because they sell the race thing. They're like
Definitely.
Republicans are racist.
Identity politics is just
Hmm.
it's a crazy easy way. It's low hanging fruit for a lot of people.
Yeah, because I was at work one day and there is a Hispanic guy and we're talking about, the election and whatnot. And he was like, yeah, the lady at the office, she's Mexican. She's Mexican, but she's a Republican. But she's real nice to us. And I was like,
What does that even?
what?
What do you even say to that?
I was like, I just looked at him and I was like, oh, okay. Like sometimes I'm like, I'm not even gonna get into it.
Yeah, man.
'Cause,
I feel
yeah.
like that a lot of the times because we talk about it so frequently throughout the week. Like we put up 3 podcasts a week, right? Him and I, and then Marisol puts up 2 a week. So in the combination of a week, probably 5+ podcasts we'll record, and a lot of it having to do with the political stuff.
Hmm.
So when I'm out and about, I never bring up politics, but everyone always wants to bring it up first with me.
Hmm.
And I will entertain it and we'll have conversations. But once it starts getting a little kooky with what they're saying, I
Hmm.
try to find a way to just segue away from it because people get
Yeah.
so sensitive to it. And that goes to almost anything. People are just so sensitive in general. I
Hmm.
was never raised that way. I have very thick skin. Most Latinos,
Yeah.
if you're not roasting each other, making fun of each other, just
Yeah.
being really jokingly, you're just not having fun with your family. So you grow up and you expect a lot of people to be okay with that. But then the toxic Twitterverse takes over or social media and people are like, whether it's body pause, or it's like him, hey, there, her, there, chest feeding, all these terms and shit. I just have no patience for it.
Yeah.
I try to live my life as being as good of a person as possible.
Hmm.
But then there comes a point where you're just like, I can't be nice to certain people, it seems like, because they're a little kooky.
Yeah. And I don't know. Sometimes I just wonder like who these people are and then I come across a certain type of people and I'm like, this is the kind of people that you can't really argue with
Yeah,
because
it's
I,
useless.
I, I hate saying it, but like I had a boss who used to say you can't fix stupid.
No, that's 100%.
And
You
yeah.
can't fix stupid.
Yeah.
And the whole reason, and to kind of take it back to podcasting, I always
Mhm.
found that doing a podcast that had some kind of value and you put it out into the world, it would have a ripple effect on the people that listen to it, right? So if we're
Mhm.
having positive, constructive conversations, you're doing good, right? You're doing good rather than going on social media and just diarrhea of the mouth, all this nonsense that's just like, who's more oppressed and you can't do anything, you can't amount to things. I'm like, that's not very productive, and that's not how I roll.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever like okay, so whenever you're gonna do a podcast with Chingo Bling and you guys are gonna like, okay, we're gonna talk about this today.
Hmm.
You go and you do your research, I assume.
Yeah.
Do you ever just like go down a rabbit hole to where you're like, I need to put this down because my
Every
brain.
day, every day, every day. And you have to try to limit that stuff. And also me, like I try to, like I said, stay positive and stuff.
Mhm.
But today, I mean, Afghanistan's falling apart, right? Kabul's
Mhm.
being taken over. Like we're going to talk about that tomorrow. We'll probably talk about that Wednesday and Friday as well.
Mhm.
So it's like, it's a bummer. And again, that for me, again, being a son of an immigrant who she risked her life to get here and give a better life to her future kids, whoever they would have been, and may have been. I happen to be one of them, right?
Mhm.
I always have an appreciation for being here. My dad served in the military. It's just I don't understand the thought process of somebody who would want to go as far as to say is that this country is the worst and people shouldn't come here and this should be, blah, 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 dictatorship or whatever. We need communism here or Marxism.
Oh my goodness.
It's just they don't understand. And to try to rationalize with people like that is completely useless. We
Mhm.
only have so much time on this planet and
Yeah.
they don't get any of my time. That's just the way I
Yeah.
look at it.
Yeah. What do you do whenever you're, or I don't know if this happens to you, but it happens to me because sometimes I'll post something, but I'm like, I want to make sure it's true, or I want to learn a little bit more about it. So I start reading all this stuff, and then I'm like not getting depressed, but
Yeah.
I'm like, man, this has me down. Like this,
Yep.
So
Yes, but here's the fun part about
Mhm.
working with a professional comedian
Okay.
and me as somebody who likes to think of themselves as a funny person. I
Mhm.
don't have to be factual all the time. We'll just
Okay.
throw shit out there and be like, look, do your own research, fact check us.
Yeah.
We think it's pretty accurate. We think we got the right resources.
Mhm.
Sometimes it may have even actually came from somebody who had boots on the ground kind of thing,
Yeah.
but you still can't take, you can't believe everything you see or read, or even at this
Mhm.
point, everything that you watch in video. Have y'all seen a bunch of like, not a bunch of, but videos that have like the deep fakes where it's like not really the person's face, like they superimpose it on somebody else and they can even make people talk like somebody else.
Oh wow.
So whenever you see a video, it's going to get to the point where how do you decipher if that's really that person that
Yeah.
said that?
Yeah.
So,
And it's sometimes, yeah, you don't know who or what to believe because like things that or organizations that were supposed to be credible are
Mhm.
now losing credibility.
100%.
The news, the CDC, so many
Yes.
other organizations, and you're like, okay, they're saying this, but now I have to question it. I can't just take what they're telling me.
Yeah.
So then you go and you question it and you find all this other stuff, and then you, like I said, you
But
go down
now
the
all of a
rabbit.
sudden, if you question authority, you're a bad person, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
just supposed to follow the instructions. Don't ask
Yeah.
questions. I've always lived my life as that to my own detriment, like asking too many questions at school and going to the principal's office, pissing off my parents and going to my room or whatever. It's
Yeah.
just that's how I'm wired. And some people are genuinely wired to be told something, accept
Mm-hmm.
that as truth, and just follow suit.
Do you think that's also what they're teaching at schools?
For sure.
Just do what we tell you. So when you're grown, you're still doing what we tell you. You're not questioning.
I know some people that know a lot more about that know a lot about that I
Mm-hmm.
actually want to talk to because I don't know about you, but when I was in school, I would look around and I'd be like, God, this looks like such a sweatshop for like, just mental training, right?
Mm.
We would just be doing the same things and people didn't seem that into it. And a lot of teachers didn't seem that into teaching, just like the kids didn't look like they were into the learning process.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's different ways to go about it, private school and, homeschool, even if you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the traditional, that's why I dropped out of college. I was like, this isn't for me. I remember literally sitting in my apartment, in my first year at Sam, doing an English paper over some nonsense and just sitting back and thinking to myself, like, I feel like I've done this already. I feel like I've done this exact same paper over this exact same subject. And I just closed my book and I closed my laptop and I laid on my bed, looked at my ceiling and I was like, I have to call my parents and tell them I don't want to do this anymore. And like having immigrant parents, all they want is for you to go to school,
Right.
graduate.
Mm-hmm.
No vas a ser doctor, no vas a ser abogado. And I was like, I don't want to, I wouldn't have wanted to do either one of those things anyway, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember having that conversation with myself and then the next day having it with my mom and I'm like, oh God. And then you could hear the disappointment in her voice. My dad was just like, he wanted me to go to the military and I
No.
didn't want to do that. So that kind of upset him.
Mm.
So I was like, all right, well, looks like I got to figure something out or my parents are really going to hate me for the rest of my life. But it worked out.
Yeah.
It's working out.
Yeah. I actually was like the good kid. I like school.
I could totally see that.
Yeah.
Goody two shoes over here,
Yeah. That was me.
raising your
But
hand, asking too many questions, making us stay when the bell rang.
no, I was shy, so I wasn't asking questions.
Okay.
But I like school. I like learning.
I like learning
love
too,
learning.
but it wasn't in that way. Like, what was your favorite? Like, what did you like about school? Like, what learning process did you like? Were you a visual learner? Did you like like a one-on-one thing? Did you like reading things?
I like reading.
Okay.
I
I
like
hate
reading.
reading.
Really?
You do? Yeah. See, man, like, I don't know if it's a
Like
guy thing
reading.
or what.
Maybe.
Like, Audible is my best friend. Audible and
Yeah.
podcasts. Like, I can't.
See, and I'll put Audible on, and I start doing stuff, and
And
then I'm like, wait, what? How did they get here?
you just
What
missed
did
the
it
whole
say?
chapter.
Yeah, and I'm like, I need to sit down, and I need to look at it, and I need to read it.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I applaud you though. We need
So
people like you.
well, even though I was always like all about school, and I don't know, I was talking to Juan about this the other day. I was like, I feel like there's certain people that will do really good without school, but I feel like I was one of the ones who needed school because I came from, immigrant mother. She was single at the time, married, got divorced, and she didn't have an education, didn't speak English. So I'm like, what would I had done if I hadn't gone to school? I'm like, maybe worked at a McDonald's, maybe married someone, ended up in a toxic relationship. I'm like,
La tóxica.
like you never, because that's what I saw at home. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, so I feel for some people, school is good because it opens doors for you.
I totally agree. I agree with you.
But I also agree that it's not for everyone.
I also agree with that.
Yeah.
I would give you and most people more credit though, because if you've ever been put in a situation where your back's against the wall, and this is like the typical Cinderella story, right? The Rocky story. Like if your back's against the wall, you're probably going to figure it out, right?
Mhm.
And maybe you would have turned into somebody who was a tradesman of sorts, right? Where you find something that you want to do and you go to school specifically for that.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to use a stereotypical, but I will. Nurse, or RN or whatever it is. That might have been the road that you took. You wouldn't have just folded and said, I'm going to go work a fast food restaurant. Like, let's be
Yeah.
real, right? So who knows what would have came of it? Maybe you would have, gone and been a radiologist or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that, but you chose the traditional where'd you go to college?
Texas Tech.
Okay, cool.
Texas Tech. And then I graduated from there. So I did some basics when I was in high school. So I was able to graduate in 2.5 years.
So you graduated
My
early
bachelor's.
too?
I
Oh,
graduated
hell.
early. And then, so but I was like that type of person that I'm like, tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? So I graduate. I moved to Houston because, that's where I hear that the opportunities are at. I come here and I'm still waitressing like I was in college. I don't know what to do. So what do? I go enroll in school again. to get my master's. So what I originally had wanted to do was psychology, but my mom was
Oh.
like, I was a first generation college student, and I guess they didn't really believe in me. I don't know, but she was like, no, because her and my aunt were like, you're gonna need to have like a doctorate if you're gonna do anything in it. Blah blah blah. It's a waste of money. This and that. You should do something else. So I was like, okay, whatever. So I was like, okay, I'm at a master level. I'm gonna go enroll and I'm gonna do psychology. But I don't think I can emotionally detach sometimes.
Mm.
So I'm like, I
Isn't that
feel,
most women though? Let's be
yeah.
real. All right, sorry, go on.
So yeah, I was like, I don't know how it would feel if like a little girl comes and tells me that she's,
Right.
being abused I was like, I don't know if I can take that. I'm like, I really like psychology. I like reading about it. I like listening about it. So I looked into it and I found industrial psychology. So that's more of like the company's problem, not the individual's problem, but the company. How can we
Word.
be more
Okay.
productive? How can we motivate our employees, etc.
I like that. Funny enough, I also
Hmm.
loved sociology and psychology in school.
Really?
So when I went to Wharton County, like when I did community college before I went to Sam,
Hmm.
that was my favorite class. It was a psychology class, and I aced it, loved it, and that's kind of where the whole. And I think after school, it kind of stuck with me as far as like liking to sit and learn and listen to people, and the phrase, you have 2 years and one mouth, you listen twice as much as you talk,
Hmm.
always stuck with me. I heard that forever ago when I was young.
Hmm.
And I think that I kind of had that. I'm not very spiritual or religious, but I say this anyway, like, you feel like you have a purpose, right?
Right.
And I think one of the purposes for me is to be able to be that kind of a person in for my environment. Like you can only affect so many people that you're around, right? You might have, let's say, 5 of your closest friends that you talk to on a regular basis, and they might come to you from time to time with their own, chisme or whatever, or their own
Hmm.
situations.
Yeah.
But then you start a podcast and you're like, oh, now I can really influence a lot more people with the right conversations and the right approach to whatever it is. So
Right.
it's kind of like we're doing it anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And now that you say that, like having the right conversations, whenever I started the podcast, I wanted to talk about relationships. So instead of me just getting on there and giving my opinion or just sitting with a friend and giving our unprofessional opinion, because I'm not a certified
Totally.
psychologist, I reached out to a marriage counselor who I had met through Natalia. So she would bring him in during pageant training and have him work with us. So that's how I knew him. So I was
Oh,
like, hey, I had this topic. I'm starting a podcast. Would you like to be on? And he said, yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm going to bring a professional talking about relationships. And then after that, I was like, well, I, and also like one of the things that made me want to start it was I was at work one time and I was actually doing industrial psychology work,
mm,
but I found out I didn't really like it that much.
really?
Yeah. So I would just listen to podcasts all day. That's what I would do. I mean, obviously I was getting work done, but
Yeah.
it was like work on the computer so I could just have my headphones on and listen. And then I was like, you know what? I know some pretty cool people. I'm like, I could talk about some topics with them.
Dude, that's exactly how and why I started my podcast. Because when
Yeah.
I had dropped out of school and I came down, I had friends that were working for this medical credentialing company,
Mhm.
and offered me, they were like, hey, we have open spots. And it sounds way more fancy than it was. It was basically doing like background checks on like doctors and nurses to make sure that their licenses and whatever were up to date.
Mhm.
And it was just a cubicle thing, and that's where I discovered podcasting. I'd gone through my music playlist like 100 times in like 7 days. I'm like, oh
Uh-huh.
my god, I just started this job and I can't listen to this music anymore, right?
Mhm.
And at the time, if you remember, there wasn't a podcasting app. There was just at the bottom of the original iTunes store, because there wasn't even an app store and an iTunes store. It was just one thing, right? If I remember correctly.
Okay.
And at the bottom, all the way to the left, like it was like 6 apps, and then you had to swipe to get to this last one, which was podcast. And that's where I discovered what a podcast was.
Ah.
And then that's where they
Okay.
had the old, original charts with Bill Burr and Carolla and all these people.
Mhm.
And then I listened to the top five, and at the time, Rogan was number five. It
Okay.
was literally like Adam Carolla, This Week in Tech, Bill Burr, and then like two other ones, or one other one, and then Rogan. And I was like, man, I was actually reluctant to listen to it. I was like, because I liked News Radio, the show that he was on in the 90s. I was like, what does a guy from News Radio and Fear Factor and UFC have to say
Mhm.
that I want to listen to? Next thing you know, that fucking show literally changed my life. So
Oh wow.
that's how I started listening to it. And I was like, oh, same thing. I can have conversations like this. Like, I want to do this. I want to have,
Yeah.
some kind of place in this podcasting world.
Mhm. So right now you're doing the red pill tamale with
Hmm.
Mango Bling, and you also have your own.
No, well,
No.
so I do the Red Pill Tamales with Chingo as his
Mhm.
co-host. And then I produce Mighty Souls as well,
Okay.
the Her Lounge podcast.
All right.
And I'm her co-host. I mean, producer and also kind of co-host.
Mhm.
And then I want to actually start another podcast again because I haven't done my own show in the 3 years that him and I have been working together.
Okay.
It was a combination of having, the brick and mortar place, working with him, and then there was just, a family thing.
Mhm.
I just put it on the back burner for the first time in my life, and then it's coming back around actually where I want to do my own thing. I
Mhm.
don't know if you have ever had this where you work with somebody and you're like, I like working with someone on something, but then there's having your own thing.
Right.
And that's way different, right?
Yes.
You put way more energy, not that you put more energy to it, but you put way more of a different part of you
It feels
into
like it's
your
your
own thing.
baby. That's how I
Yeah,
describe it. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
goes for your supplement business or it goes
Mhm.
for your podcast.
Yes.
Anything that you do, whether you're doing a pageant or it's your thing and
Mhm.
you want to do a certain something with it and you want to get a certain something kind of a return out of it.
Mhm.
So that's the same thing I'm trying to do. I'm just, it's, and again, you on social media, you have probably like a love hate with it where you're like, I like putting things out there and putting myself out there. But then there's certain days where you're just like, I don't give a fuck anymore. Like, I
Yeah.
don't care what you have to say. Like, I don't want to do this sometimes, but it's part of the process.
Yeah. And now that you say that, the coach that I hired, the speech coach, he was like, you have to go on Instagram story every day and say something.
Hmm.
So now it's like I have to, even if I don't, if it's one of those days where I'm like, screw all of y'all. No, I'm
Yeah,
just kidding.
that's funny.
But
I
yeah.
live more in my stories than I do on my wall. Like I don't think I've posted something. I posted something for 4th of July,
Mhm.
and then I hadn't posted something like a year from like we did a live show at the Houston Improv, and that was the last picture I posted. Like I
Oh
just
wow.
I just
Yeah.
don't care sometimes. I should put in my bio. I live in my stories. Like go in there if you follow me, that's where I'm at. It's just
Yeah.
posting something for the algorithm every day, multiple times a day.
Mhm.
It isn't for me right now with anything. And like most people, I don't feel like they have anything to say, but they go on social media anyway and they just
Mhm.
post shit and they're just like, they have nothing better to do, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
No, no, no. But okay, so whenever you started podcasting, you said you had this microphone that you were sharing with your guest, and you had your phone. So basically, like for someone listening, so one advice that you can give them is just start with what you have. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just go for it.
I
Just start.
started with an iPhone 3G. I didn't even have the 3GS. So I had the slower one at the time. Like, I don't know if you remember. Have you always had an iPhone?
No, I used to be an Android
Get out of
person.
my face. You always had an iPhone?
What?
Oh, fuck. Never mind. All right. Well, I can't make any jokes then. Well, I've had an iPhone since the iPhone 2.
Okay.
Like I had a
Oh wow.
Razor in high school
I
and then
had that one.
okay, cool. Razors were dope. I wouldn't mind having a Razor
Mhm.
again just because it was so simple.
They have them now.
I saw, which
Yeah.
made me think about it.
Yeah.
But I always say that, but I'm never going to give it up.
Yeah.
Follow me if you want, Apple, whatever. I just podcast. You can follow me to different studios. No, but I had an iPhone, 2 and then 3 and on iPhone 3G, I started the podcast on an app on my phone. And now there's things like Anchor. I keep hearing about Anchor as an
I
app.
feel like I've heard about it, but I don't know what it is.
It's like a podcasting distribution app
Okay.
where you can literally talk into the app itself, record your show, and it distributes it to iTunes, Spotify, and everything.
Oh, okay.
Or you can do it on your computer and then upload it to the Anchor, software, kind of like Libsyn or Podbean or whatever directory you use,
Mhm.
and it takes care of the rest.
Okay.
Now you don't even need an app. You can just do it or now you don't even need a microphone. You can just do it from the app on your iPhone speaker.
Mm.
So just start. If you really want to do it, that's the best thing. Like it's going to take time. You're going to have to refine it. You're going to have to get better at it. But it's also going to help you with those life skills of like critical thinking and speaking and all those things.
What other advice would you give them?
If you want to start like for real,
Mm-hmm.
find a directory. I don't know what you use, but wherever you upload your podcast, that's like the number one thing. Like if you want to start it, do research on, Podbean, Libsyn, Blue something, Blueberry, I think is the other one, and just find a reputable place where you can host this audio. Because if you think about it, you're putting all this time into these recordings.
Mm-hmm.
You want a really good company that's going to host all this audio.
Right.
And then just budget out time and budget out money because it also costs money to host this audio every month.
Yeah.
And if you really are like trying to scrounge it up, it's going to be a difficult process to get even one microphone or two microphones, because you want to do a guest show, or if you want to do it by yourself, get the right mic, the right recorder, and the right software. And those three things will keep you going for months, if not a year, until you can upgrade spaces and places and stuff.
Yeah. And then also they can go to your YouTube videos that
They-
I watched, and
Yeah.
I learned how to upload it to Libsyn.
Yes, you can. I might have them unlisted because I was going to revamp them all.
Okay.
So we have a bigger place, and my wife doesn't work from home anymore, which is great. I have my own home office back. We have a bigger place, and I want to redo them with more info and more like inflection and excitement.
Mm-hmm.
But I might just put them back up there as they are, so people
I
can
thought
watch
they
them.
were useful.
Well, I appreciate that.
Because when you're doing like what's it called, the how-to, I guess a tutorial.
Mhm.
you don't really care how they're talking. You're kind of just trying to
Follow along.
follow along. Yeah, well, and what they're saying is what really matters.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so because I kept putting it on pause, I'm like, okay, he said this. Let me go back.
Yeah, and that's what I was
Yeah.
trying to do is make it as like as easy step by step as possible. And
Hmm.
yeah, I'll think about it. If you do listen to this and want to do that, it's how to get started podcasting.
Okay,
That's the
that's what
video.
it's
That's
called.
the series. You can just look that up and you should find it.
And then they can find you on Instagram as RobGTV.
Yes, everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. I don't really use Snapchat.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole idea of calling it that, when Instagram and social media first started taking off, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to be on TV one day. So I just
Mhm.
called it Rob GTV, and it's been like that for like 12 years.
Well, YouTube is now the new TV.
You're right. And podcasting as well, in a way, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
So I kind of did it.
yeah.
Hey, Mom, I kind of did it. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're out of time, so thank you for
Dude.
being here today
Yeah, man,
and
this was
talking
fun.
to
It
us.
was a blast.
Yeah, glad it finally happened.
Absolutely.
Woo.
Thank you, Juan, for being the audience and the producer.
If you like this podcast, share it. Maybe it will be of help to someone you know. And if you don't want to miss any of our podcasts, follow us on social media and subscribe to our channel. Built from the Inside Out wants to give you a 10% discount on your next supplement purchase at www.bcnsubs.com. Just use code BUILT at checkout. Thank you so much for listening.